getting the most bang for our buck here. AI usage, look at the company's AI initiatives. Vibe coding came out number one, right, which was a little counterintuitive. If you could ask us 6 months ago where we got to find the greatest value, probably would have said additive and rich goods, but it's actually true to the vibe curve. That gets dropped into an S3 bucket. Then on top of that, we have some of the C, which is our the management layer. It's lightweight Voodoo management layer. Has database indexes on it. And then we have Embrace as our orchestration layer that sits in the middle, such that when things happen in the S3 bucket or within CVC, the Embrace then puts a message out on our media bus, which is an AWS SNS topics that other things subscribe to. And then that triggers, for instance, the emoji system would go ahead and fetch the files way off. Another benefit that we have here, putting everything we have, right? Media bus, the SNS topic and the OS, is all of this ends up in Snowflake. Then we have simply AI on top of that as well. Result is that at any point in the day, I can ask the system, how much is it costing me at this moment as use a 3-second spot, create syndicated program or another piece of content? They could come back and tell us, this is how much it's costing. This is what the processing time it is, the latency, basically the performance of the system all the way through. That allows us to make some very intelligent determinations about how the system is working now, but also how it's working in the future.
And that part, I remember years ago when we were first trying to talk about some of the cloud transformation that Fair wanted to do, was identified as one of the key challenges is that oftentimes you and other customers, we have gut feelings about there's probably a lot of inefficiencies in a process, but we don't have the data to make data-driven decisions about where we're going to have the most impact. And so you talk a little bit about like the intentionality or how you put in place some of that instrumentation to get that data.
This was put in from the very beginning of cloud transformation because we wanted it to carry both downs, what's happening as well as the bursts. It needs something to have these there bands for different things to happen. So it was built in from the very, very beginning. And here's an example of how useful it's been. This time last year, we started to have problems, which was the components in the system. And they're happening off my traffic base. And they started happening, decreasing treatments. We need to drill down and find out exactly what was going on with that. And it was only because we captured this information on the media bus I'm going to do Snowflake that we were able to diagnose what the problem was. But in a mitigation, then we also were able to determine that our mitigation was only going to last until the end of June 2026. Okay. So that allowed us to start planning last year for this transition off of that system into an AWS native functions that were actually right down. And we're actually ahead of schedule, so we'll finish that project by the end of this.
Awesome. I see you have some of the functionality that you've implemented in the media pipeline.
Right. So its primary purpose is to do transcode normalization, but we're also doing timing functions, QC, and captions. So if something comes in without captions, we'll automatically bash through AI. Captioning for that, really, which I timing and then we'll QC on it. We've also talked about this a little bit for a second. Done synthetic generation, chromos, episodic chromos. Obviously, the playout integration we talked about with Madi and metrics and architectural optimization risk.
Mike, I was wondering before we move on if you could talk about the challenges, right, for the transcode normalization that we've seen. I imagine all of these different distributors and contributors that are bringing content in, right? The process of normalizing happens to be really important.
Right. It's a little bit different for local broadcasters than it would be for a network. Obviously, if you're a network bringing syndicated content in and is being produced from your productions shops and documentary producer, program producers, etc., you can tell them this is the target you need to hit with very clear specificity on that. And it's nice to have that from our distributors like Itchblue and Extreme Reach. But whenever we're talking about the guy in Kearney, Nebraska, working from his garage, he really thinks 24 frames per second was nice. Okay. And we have to make sure that when we run that through the pipeline, that we're not failing, that we're compensating for it. And, we aren't slowing things down. We do manage by exception. And right now that means we leave as few exceptions as possible because each one of those is usually an intervention. The post NAB project for us, this one that we talked about with AWS, is putting agentic AI to handle more of the exceptions for us. So notifying its tree reach whenever we happen as a media, and doing some more sophisticated processing traditionally. So to give you an idea of how much content that we're producing, the numbers above the black line are the approximate number of each one of these categories of files we receive per month. Okay. And then if we take that out to a year, right now we're on pace for about 2 million files and we're on an increasing trend line. So as we add more stations to the cloud. So you would think that by the end of the year, we would be well above 2 million. We're on pace for 2.5 million by the end of the year. Put all those together in a line of poker chips that would reach down to great to give you some idea. But we're actually going to drop the renditions down to close to 1 million, but cut in half by the end of the year. And that's because we're cutting the number of renditions that we're producing. As we do our migration to the cloud, we don't have to do as many ambitions for all different systems. And so total number drops, so making it more efficient. At the same time that we're doing this, we're also doing a transition to ADC, which is cutting our bit rate in half. Very important for us because we have to carry these files down to the stations for DR systems. So by reducing the bit rate, we're actually saving ourselves up to $1 million a year in additional bandwidth that would otherwise be needed.
And that point of optimization and sort of this journey that you've taken where you put in place the cloud media pipeline, now can you talk a little bit about the agility that it enables in terms of swapping out components as necessary, the visibility it's giving you in seeing where some of the bottlenecks or potential issues are with the pipeline, and then the flexibility you have to sort of experiment and elastically grow and shrink as needed?
Sure. First of all, we've switched everything over to step functions and stereo sheets. And this is an example of step functions and state machines. This is what our workflow looks like in AWS. A lot of people are familiar with, Filter Advantage and something like this is a different way of representing this, but this is the step function that they in AWS. We are able to plug new things into this and change the logic rather quickly. Okay, and test and look good in his voucher. The example of that is my boss, Mike Raylet, said, can we put watermarking into this from a third-party provider? Yes. And we talked to the provider and said, can you put this in a container for us? We said, yes. That into the system. So it conditionally went through. If there's a flag on it, then we would go ahead and watermark the content. Right now, we're watermarking all the content for our Salt Lake City market. And as soon as they validate the reception of that, I can hit a button and we're watermarking content for everything going to all of our local stations. And that was a rather small lift for us. And we were able to do that very quickly.
Great.
Yeah. And I was just going to add on the step function state machine, it really gives you the ability to configure to make sure that you catch any failures, right? So that if there are issues with the upload, you can detect that and then have different routes and paths to alert folks or to maybe auto remediate and inform the person that uploaded the file that it was wrong rather than having to wait until 5 minutes before air to realize that something is wrong. So having that integration within the step function, you can really customize to your particular workflow, right? As far as what you all are trying to achieve.
And this is visually very easy to work with. But it is all boiled down to code underneath it. And then the code goes in a repo and then the code can be analyzed through the normal security processes. It can be versioned. It can be shared. You're putting it through a normal development pipeline, even though you're representing it here as a flowchart.
And I think one of the things that sometimes our customers struggle with is taking on a project like Cloud Media Pipeline can be intimidating. And I think you and your team did a great job of like taking both an initial approach as well as like the iterative approach and continuously improving and optimizing and finding ways to optimize. Did you have a slide earlier about like that initial approach?
Well, let me just point at this. I mean, you look at that and you think, well, a person has gone through and laid that out. Actually, not. Our first cut on this was to describe to AI the workflow that we had inside of the previous platform and say, replicate this for us. And it created a rough outline of that in this form. And then we went in and manually tweaked that and iteratively tested and then, worked for efficiency as well as consistency on that. And it's nice to have this boiled down to code because it means it's in the repo. And if this was to go away and we still have the code, we could still rebuild it in another region if we needed to.
Absolutely.
So just some last things before I hand it over to Matt to talk about some POC projects that we had. Our mantra, if you will, is measure everything: the volume, the rate, the latency, the cost, the failures and the issues so that we can manage by exception. And as a result, our baseline performance has improved as compared to the old process. We're going more than twice as fast from end to end within the platform. We're able to look at operating patterns like what is our busiest day and what part of our busiest day is the busiest? What is the slowest part of the day? Which actually helps us with staffing. So we know going into the Thanksgiving weekend exactly what day before the Thanksgiving weekend that we have most of our distributors and contributors sending files in.
That's awesome.
So we're able to do that. Identify potential issues. I gave you an example of that, and then 4 plans for mitigation and resolution, which has been very, very helpful.
And then that to build on your busiest and non-busy day scenario, like just that elasticity, the way you've architected with the event-driven architecture. Like, can you talk a little bit more, either you or Matt, about like the benefits of being able to scale as needed and not have to worry about the old days of traditional on-prem hardware where all of a sudden you get a bunch of stuff into the station or into the media processing center and you just can't deal with it. You've got long queues and you have people who are waiting for deliverables that may take multiple hours to be ready or get delivered.
We're not quite to a fully deterministic system where I can say it's going to take X number of seconds for a content to go through the system. But as compared to the on-prem, where on Thursdays, which would most everybody's busiest day, and if it's being ingested from a local point of ingest on local hardware, that if you have a typically sized system, for on-prem, you could have 2-hour delays, okay, from the time content was dropped in to the time it came out the other end, in which you really don't know from the station perspective. You don't know very well whether you actually received the file or not, if it was good, if it's going to make it out at the end. Do I have to wait 2 hours to see if the file is actually good, it's going to make it? Has the distributor or contributor gone home by that time?
Right.
Because we're in the cloud right now, we have low variability on this. And with the new system, we're slightly less than real time for the complete processing of the file.
Wow.
So there's a little bit of overhead. So if somebody sends us a 30-second spot, it may take 2 minutes to go through. But if it's a 30-minute program, it takes about 30 minutes to go through the system.
That's awesome. And do I remember correctly that you're even thinking about, based on all of this data that you've gathered by being intentional about instrumentation and measuring everything, you're even now thinking about ways to efficiently batch processes and take advantage of variations in compute price and the way you're processing things?
That's a discussion.
Okay.
Because balancing what we want to do with the right type of buy and reservations of the instance types. In the past, we were using some persistent instances with the previous platform. Okay. we don't really need those for transcode now. We have them for the orchestration in the middle, but making sure that you're using the right compute types can optimize your cost, your throughput, your performance, and most important, your availability, because you don't want to ask to transcode something and have AWS say, nope, sorry, we don't have any compute. And that's happened, but it turned out we weren't asking the question in the right way. Instead of saying, this is the only type of compute that will work for me, then you need to give a range of compute. So in case the one you want is not available, you've always got one to fail back to.
Yeah. And to just add on to that kind of scaling mindset with a traditional transcode system, right? You would have the ability to maybe scale up a CPU to process more jobs, right? But with the step functions approach, each file is a separate execution that is itself self-contained.
Yeah. Let me say this simply. This is serverless.
Yeah.
Okay. It's serverless transcode. The only thing we're putting in a server is the workflow orchestration.
Yep. And then the file comes in and it scales out, and we're able to batch process all of those files, like you just mentioned with those metrics.
That's impressive on many levels. I think one of the other enablers that we see as customers are moving more of their content and processes to the cloud is the ability to not only use the best of breed tools and architectures and have that agility to swap things out or experiment as you look at potential watermarking solutions or whatever additional workflows or features you want. But all of the advances on AI and what can be done with agentic workflows has really enabled all sorts of experimentation and optimizations. And Matt and Mike, I know you've been working on some pretty cool uses of AI to help automate the media supply chain process. Could you walk the audience through that a little?
Yeah.
So we challenged Matt and Adam to to show us how AWS could in an optimized way produce our episodic promos for us. So episodic promos are 10, 20, 30-second promos for a syndicated program that have to be customized for tomorrow, today, tonight, coming up next. And they have to be customized for the station with the station's logo and voiceover at the end of it. And right now, we automate those, but we run everything through in a batch, and we create thousands of these things, and only a small percentage of them are actually used, because we create a rendition for every possible permutation. So what we wanted to do is come up with an agentic way to do this, and a generative way to do this on demand that would drop the station logo, the station voiceover onto each one of those, in addition to taking the source material. All the promos come in a single file, and you have to segment those out. So how do you automate the segmenting and then the generation of those?
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, this was a really fun project that we got to work on with Sinclair. And what we found was that large file, say a 25, 30-minute file, would have 50 different promos, and we would have different segments. We'd have black segments, slate, and then content. And so we had to figure out a way of how we could automate the extraction of those components. So with the cloud media pipeline, we're already uploading that content into S3, so we could create an automation. So as soon as the files get uploaded into S3, we execute a step function state machine, which is just a workflow engine. And the first thing we're doing is we're using a combination of FFmpeg commands to identify the black frames, as well as identifying, detecting static frames. So we're kind of deducing where the content is based upon where the black frames are and where the static frames are with the slate. Once we have kind of those content segments identified, we're taking a frame of the slate and conducting OCR to extract the text from the image. And each
production house is going to have a different slate format. So we take that text from the slate and run that against an LLM. So to get an understanding of what's timing, what's the title, what's the distributor, and whatnot. So we're just really gathering all that information in so that we can then make the correct determination of how to create that file. So once we have the black frames, we have the slate, we have the content, we're able to then execute using Amazon Bedrock Agent Core, an agent that will go out and find the file, find the corresponding logo for the specific market that we want to create the promo for. And then we're doing other things where we're automating the overlay of the logo. So we need to figure out maybe what quadrant we should put the logo on. So we're using Amazon recognition on several frames to detect areas of interest or detect text so that we know where we're overlaying the logo is a safe region. And then kind of lastly, the cool part is taking the voiceover segments for the call to action at the end and being able to kind of add on that, create a new mix down, and then kind of package it all into a final file.
Now, my question was, how much does this cost? Okay. And we have to look at the whole economics of what we were doing. Before this, we were generating thousands of promos that we did not use. Okay. At a small cost per promo, but that cost built up. Okay. These are actually more expensive to produce than any single promo that we were producing before. But because we can produce these now on demand as they're needed, we only need a couple of hundred of these where before we were generating thousands of them. So this is actually a better economic model for us, and it allows us to create those on demand instead of batching thousands of them a week.
And does it also enable you to then use creative folks who were working on all this promo creation to create new compelling content? Like, is there
Yes. And so what the workflow before required the creative folks to look at that original source file and segment it and then tweak some templates to make that happen. And there was a staff of several people who did that every week. Now they're able to go and work on custom content because they're in that same department. They're still there. They're still working. They're working on custom content rather than these promos that have smaller amounts of value.
And I think that was one of just throughout the entire project and also your entire cloud transformation, I think you and your team have done an incredible job of looking at, when you're doing cost comparison, oftentimes some customers get very hyper focused on like A to B and, the compute might be a little bit more expensive. But to your point, if you now have to do less work and don't have to create as many promos, there's big savings there. And then if you're also unlocking resources to create new compelling content, there's potential revenue additions. And like it's a much more holistic way of looking at TCO and ROI.
Yeah, it's a larger computation than did I just reduce my unit cost?
Yes.
So that's what we did. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Are there, we've got a couple minutes left. And so thinking about the overall journey, any hints that you want to give or pieces of advice that you'd want to give to audience who's thinking of taking similar journey for optimizing their cloud media or optimizing their media pipelines or supply chains?
Sure. It's a little bit more complicated than it sounds. Okay. But not as hard as you think. Okay. So, you can start on this journey and vibe code a lot of this, start off with some simple workflows and then build up what Matt and Adam were working on for us. But the ramp for this for us was only a few months. Okay. It wasn't overnight, but it also wasn't, 12 months either. So we were able to react very quickly to it. This has also, increased the scale at which we can operate generally. And we do have the new concept of broadcast as a service. So if somebody's interested in using this for their spot and syndication reception, then that is certainly an option.
That's awesome. So you've created something that's so flexible and capable that now not only are you servicing the needs of Sinclair, but you're in the position where you can offer this type of capability to other broadcasters and content creators.
Right. And generally at lower latency and faster speed and lower cost than they would be able to achieve with on-prem hardware.
So once again, emphasizing the point of like TCO and ROI is oftentimes a much bigger picture than when we're just looking at very small part of the problem and trying to do a simple calculation.
Right. And let me emphasize, I don't need any broadcast as a service customers to make my model work.
Yes.
So we've achieved our goals already, but this is an additional business opportunity that's provided us.
Icing on the cake.
Yes.
Awesome. Matt, Mike, thank you so much for joining us today. I'd like to thank the audience for taking time out of a busy NAB show to come and spend time with us. We're going to be off to the side of the stage. If you want to have any additional questions or just say hello, we'll be here for a few minutes, and thank you for coming.
Let's give him a hand. This is great. Thank you guys so much. And not only that, you're going to have a twofer because this young man here is going to be joining us again, Ali. So there you go. Got two for the price of one. But like I say, if you have any questions, feel free to come up and ask them. They're very personal. They're great guys. And they'll be happy to sign your T-shirts or whatever you guys want to do.
Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you.